Magundat helped carry off the holiest relic in Christendom as a trophy of war. He was the son of a Persian sorcerer, raised from boyhood in the rites of fire worship and magic. He rode with the army that sacked Jerusalem and hauled away the true cross in chains. And within little more than a decade, he would kneel in Persian custody and let executioners strangle him, rather than speak a single word against the faith of the God his own army had plundered. Magundat would burn his old name, put on a monk's robe, walk willingly back into enemy territory, and die refusing to deny Jesus Christ. And the empire that killed him would end up carrying his severed head all the way to Rome to be venerated. He went looking for a relic. He found a savior who asked for everything. This isn't the story of a soldier who switched sides. It's the story of a man who traded a sword he trusted completely for a faith that would cost him everything, and discovered that the trade was the only victory that ever mattered. Let's go back to where it started, not in a church, but on a battlefield, in the army of a king who believed he had already won. Chapter 1. The Son of the Fire. In the city of Ray, in the heart of the Persian Empire, a boy named Magundat grew up learning to read the future in flame. His father, Bavi, was a magus, a Zoroastrian priest, a keeper of sacred fire, a man whose standing came from knowing things ordinary men did not. Magundat was raised in that world completely. The rites, the fire temples, the old certainties of an empire that had ruled for centuries and expected to rule for centuries more. He grew into a soldier, and a capable one, disciplined, loyal, useful to a king who was, in these years, unstoppable. Khosrow II sat on the Sasanian throne, and his armies were tearing through the Roman world city by city. Antioch fell, Damascus fell, and in the year 614, his soldiers reached Jerusalem. Magundat was there when it happened. The city that Christians called holy was besieged, broken, and burned. Churches were gutted. Thousands were killed or driven into slavery, and in the wreckage, Persian soldiers found something they didn't expect to care about. A relic the Christians called the true cross. The wood, tradition held, on which Jesus of Nazareth had been executed 6 centuries earlier. They took it as plunder, the way they took gold and silver, and carried it east in chains toward the Persian capital. Magundat helped carry it. To him it was cargo, one more captured treasure from one more conquered people. He had no reason yet to think it was anything else. Chapter 2. The Cross in Chains. But something strange began moving through the camp. Soldiers who had carried the relic started talking. Sick men who touched the wood, they said, were getting well. When the cross passed through Chalcedon with the army, the whispers grew louder. Persians themselves, men who had never bent a knee to the Christian God, were watching things happen they could not explain. Magundat had spent his whole life being trained to interpret signs and omens. This one troubled him. He began asking questions. Quiet ones at first, then more direct. What was this cross to the Christians? Who was the man who had died on it? What did they believe had happened 3 days later? The answers unsettled everything he thought he knew. He heard about a God who had become a man who had been executed as a criminal by an empire not so different from his own, a grave that had not held him. Not long after, word reached the camp that the Roman Emperor Heraclius had turned the war around and was pushing the Persian army back. For Magundat, the timing mattered less than the pull he was already feeling. He left his post. He walked away from the army, from the rank he had earned, from the only identity he had ever known. And he did not go home. He made his way instead toward Hierapolis in Syria, where he lodged with a Persian goldsmith, a secret Christian, and asked to be baptized. The goldsmith hesitated. Baptizing a deserter from the king's own army was a dangerous thing to be caught doing, so Magundat went alone into a nearby church to pray. On the walls, he found paintings of the martyrs, men and women who had died rather than deny the faith he was still only beginning to understand. Something in him recognized what he was looking at before he had words for it. He continued on to Jerusalem, the very city he had once helped ransack. And there, at the hands of the Patriarch Modestus, he was baptized. He took a new name, Anastasius. In Greek, it means resurrection. For the first time in his life, he said the words plainly, to no one but himself and the God he had just given everything to. I am a Christian. It would not be the last time those words cost him something. Chapter 3. 7 years among the stones. Anastasius did not stop at baptism. He entered a monastery near Jerusalem, in the community gathered around Aber Justin, where monks who had fled the ruined Lavra of St. Sabas had taken refuge. There he took the habit and gave himself to the hardest, most unremarkable work available: cook, gardener, the brother who kept the fires going, and the vegetables watered. For 7 years he lived that way. No miracles, no crowds, just labour, prayer, and the long, invisible work of being remade. He was never absent from the services, and in whatever hours were his own, he read, especially the accounts of the early martyrs, the men and women who had died in the arenas and under the swords of earlier persecutions. Those stories did something to him. Where another man might have read them as history, Anastasius read them as an invitation. Tradition preserved that he wept over the pages, moved not by pity, but by longing. A longing to give the same gift he read about, if God asked it of him. Chapter 4. The Golden Cup. According to the account preserved from his early life, that longing came to a point on Holy Saturday, the day before Easter, the day the Church remembers Christ still in the tomb. Anastasius had spent himself in the day's labour and fallen asleep, exhausted. In the dream that followed, a radiant figure came to him, holding a golden chalice full of wine. "Ah, take this," the figure said, "and drink." Anastasius drank, and when he woke, he understood the dream as an answer to the longing he had carried for 7 years. The cup was martyrdom. God was calling him to it. He told no one where he was going. He simply left the monastery, quietly, and turned south, back toward Persian-held territory, back toward the very danger he had once fled. Chapter 5. Into the lion's den. Anastasius arrived in Caesarea, a city in Palestine still under Persian control, and did not hide. He sought out Zoroastrian priests, the same fire priests he himself had once trained among, and openly rebuked their rites as empty. The fire worship, the divination, all of it. He had practiced these things himself, he told them, and he had found something greater. It did not take long. The local Mazban, the Persian governor of the region, had him arrested. His first sentence was not death, but grinding humiliation, hard labour, hauling stone without rest, jeered at and abused by Persians passing by, who knew exactly what he had once been and what he had become. The Mazban brought him back for questioning and made his position clear. He would write to King Khosrow himself, informing him that a former soldier of the royal army had converted to the faith of the empire's enemies. The consequences, he implied, would not be his to control. Anastasius did not flinch. whatever they wanted him to say, he had only one answer to give. I am a Christian. He was beaten for it and sent back to the fortress. But the Marsban's letter had already gone out, and the answer that came back from the king's court was not a pardon. Anastasius was ordered moved east, down toward the Euphrates, to a place called Bethsalo. There, in front of witnesses, the empire intended to break him, or make an example of him. Either would do. Chapter 6. Bethsalo. At Bethsalo, the Persian authorities did not begin with Anastasius. They began with the 70 men who had been arrested alongside him, fellow Christians, companions in captivity, and one by one, at the water's edge, they killed them. Some accounts say strangled, others say drowned in the river. Either way, Anastasius was made to watch every one of them die. A fresh threat delivered 70 separate times. Recant now, and you will not be next. He watched all 70 fall, and did not move toward the door. They kept leaving open for him. When his own turn came, the offer was repeated one final time. Dressed now in its most tempting form. Renounce the Christian God. Return to the fire, and King Khosrow himself would restore him. Rank, honor, wealth, a name again among the powerful. Everything he had walked away from in that army camp or years earlier could be his again, for one sentence. Anastasius gave them the only sentence he had left to give. I am a Christian, not as a fact about himself, but as the whole of what remained, the only rank, the only wealth, the only name he still wanted. They strangled him at the river's edge. When he was gone, the executioners pulled his body from the water and cut off his head, to be carried back as proof to the king who had ordered it. It was the 22nd of January, in the year 628. Chapter 7. The body. They could not erase. His body was thrown out for the dogs, the standard final humiliation for an executed traitor. Tradition holds that the dogs would not touch it, and that it lay untouched until Christians were able to recover it. From there, his relics began a journey almost as long as his story. They were carried first into Palestine, then to Constantinople, and finally to Rome, where they were laid to rest at the Trefontaine Abbey. His head was enshrined separately, venerated for centuries at the church of Saints Vincent and Anastasius. Not long after his death, someone who knew the details of his life, possibly someone who had known him personally, wrote his story down in Greek. That account, the Passio of Saint Anastasius, crossed the Mediterranean and was translated into Latin. A century later, in a monastery in far-off Northumbria, the English historian, known as the Venerable Bede, read that Latin translation, judged it clumsy, and set about revising it himself, meaning the story of a Persian soldier who died beside the Euphrates had, within 100 years, reached the edge of the known world. Today, both the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church keep his memory on the same day, January 22nd, a rare point of shared witness for a man who started his life worshipping fire and ended it refusing to worship anything but Christ. You will probably never be marched to a riverbank and told to renounce your faith or die. But somewhere in your life, there is a smaller version of that walk. A moment where simply saying what you believe will cost you something. Anastasius already showed you it's a trade worth making. History forgot them, but they were faithful. And now it's our turn to remember. Subscribe to Forgotten Heroes of Faith.